Welcome, everyone. We just have the platform open a little bit early, just so that there's not a delay and you miss something. So we're just waiting for other participants to come in, and we will start right at 1 o'clock Eastern time.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest of the webinars from Boxer Advisors. We're delighted to have all of you with us today. So as we're starting out a new year, many people that I know either have developed New Year's resolutions or use the new year to think about building habits. And so we thought it might be timely before we end the first quarter to do a session on minding the gap, being intentional about building new habits. And so today we're delighted to have with us Belinda Willis, who is going to be our guest facilitator. So I'm delighted that she's with us today, and we're delighted to have all of you here with us. So Belinda actually worked for the County of York, Virginia, and she was the Chief of Children's Services, the Children's Services Division, which administered programs for at-risk families. She oversaw contracts and services and grants with that organization, providing services to people who really need them in Virginia. And when she was working in that office, it just happened, it sounds, she was asked a number of times to do training. And so she left and started her own company. And so she is a double threat, both providing clients with some consulting solutions, facilitating offsites and focus groups, helping them with succession planning, and also, as you'll see today, does training. And so, Belinda, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you, Ken.
Yep, and I know, as I told her, I'm looking forward to it. So what I want to do is tell you, I know we've got sort of a mix of folks on the webinar today. So what I'll do is tell you a little bit. We've got some of our long-term clients. We have some potential clients who are new to us, and then we've got some colleagues who are on the webinar today. So I'll tell you a little bit about us, and then what I'll do is I'll cover some housekeeping details, and then we'll launch our first polling question. So I think this is year 28 for me that I've run my own consulting practice, and the focus of Boxer Advisors is to deliver high impact consulting, coaching, and training solutions to meet our client needs. And we find that one of the secret sauces to our work is when we can integrate our solutions into what our clients are trying to do, we have seen some measurable results. And so, for instance, one of our corporate clients years ago, they launched a big career development initiative. They had become a Fortune 1000 company. And one of the ways that we were able to track results was they put in a proposal year 2 or 3 into the Fortune 500 best companies to work for. And then in the next year, they actually increased their ranking on that score, the best companies to work for, by 75 points, which is pretty impressive as a result of our efforts. So we always, when possible, try to look for measurable results. So a little bit about the focus of our work. If you sort of peel back the onions or look at it, there are really three buckets to what we do. We help clients develop their leadership capabilities. We help them drive organizational change, and we help them engage and retain top talent. Over the last 28 years, we've probably worked with over 40 federal agencies and a number of large for-profit organizations and nonprofits. So we're delighted to have you with us today. A couple of housekeeping details. One is, we're going to give you, there'll be a number of opportunities for you to participate. We're going to launch the poll momentarily, but there'll be a number of polling questions. And so we would encourage you when we launch them to vote and provide your input. Second, if you have some questions as we go, for me, it's at the bottom of my Zoom screen. It'll either say question or chat, and you can type in a question that you might have for Belinda. And my understanding is she's going to handle questions as we go to the extent that she can, and then she'll deal with some other questions at the end. And then again, I don't know about you, but sometimes it happens in a 60-minute webinar that either A, you didn't have a chance to ask a question, or as soon as the webinar ends, you think, oh man, I wish I'd asked that question. So at the end of the webinar, we'll give you my email address. And if that happens to you, you can send me an email and we will forward it to Belinda and she'll get back to you. The second thing I want to say before we launch the first poll is, if anyone can't hear me or can't see the screen, I think Sarah Witt, who is our erstwhile expert administrator, she'll put her email address, I believe, in the chat bar. And if anyone's having any challenges, again, hearing me, seeing the screen, you can reach out to Sarah and she'll do her best to set you straight. Sarah, are there any other housekeeping details that you think are important to mention?
I think you covered it, Ken. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do it. The two other things that I can think of are, if anyone wants a copy of the slides, again, just send me an email. And if you want a recording of the session, we are recording the session. And if either A, you want to listen to it again, or B, you want to pass along to your colleagues, again, send me an email, we'll send that out to you. So anyway, those are some background information. And so Sarah, if you can launch the first poll, let's take a look at what people would like to learn today, and that will be our guidepost. So we'll keep the poll open another about 25 seconds. And if under the header of developing new habits, if there's something else that you're hoping to learn, you can type it in the chat bar. So we'll close the poll, Sarah, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, funny. Anyway, so Belinda, I don't know what this says, but 50% of the people say, why is it so difficult to make new behaviors or habits stick? What are some of the challenges? And then the second, about 50% said, what are some specific steps to build new habits? So what do you say about that?
I say it's interesting that it's split half and half.
Yeah, right, right.
And we're going to talk about why it's so difficult. And I'm going to give you some very specific steps to help you build new habits.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I imagine both of those issues are connected. So anyway, I know I'm looking forward to hearing more. So anyway, if I'll let you take it from here about, what are the objectives for the session, and I'll let you go from here. That's great.
Okay. Thank you, Ken, and thank you for inviting me to talk about habits and intentional change. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so fair warning, I tend to get a little animated. Our learning objectives for today are to look at the science of habits, and we'll talk about what actually goes on in the brain when we build habits. We're going to understand the barriers to behavior change and how to overcome them. And we're going to try to understand how to edit our current patterns of behavior in our life so that we can accommodate new behavior. And finally, we're going to talk about making behavior change less complicated. Okay, I'm having an issue with slide transition. There we go. Okay, so first of all, why is change so hard? Let's take a look at why it's inherently difficult. Whether we like it or not, most of us are creatures of habit, and I think you'll agree with me on that. Some of those habits are intentional and used as a way of organizing your life. Do you ever catch yourself putting your keys in a different place or changing the order of the way you do things? It causes disruption. No matter how small, change creates disruption, which in turn creates resistance. Think about the types of things that gets disrupted: your daily routine, processes alteration of the current operating structure, change to process, and typically technology. Since resistance is a function of the level of disruption the change creates, transformational change also brings with it significant resistance. So first of all, change is difficult because there's usually a lack of clear scope or definition. People tend to say they want to lose weight instead of losing 10 pounds. Your goal for your habit needs to be specific and measurable. If it's not concrete enough for me to see or be able to describe, we won't know when we get there. Secondly, too many other changes are competing for resources. You should never try to implement a lot of changes at the same time. I always encourage people to focus down to speed up. And when you're implementing change, I encourage people to implement something tiny. Resistance. Since resistance is a function of disruption, we know that transformational change results in major levels of resistance. Have a plan for how you manage resistance. Sometimes you're just not going to feel like sustaining your new habit. And motivation, weak motivation. The motivation that leaves the current state must be greater than staying where you are. So I always like to say people need to feel some level of pain before they actually change. And typically humans are risk averse. If we are faced with the unknown, we tend to drag our feet. We don't want to step off the ledge, so to speak. We want to stay in our comfort zones. Sometimes there's unclear or undisciplined governance structure, whether that is your day at work or whether that's your daily routine. How will the transformation be managed? And if you're creating enterprise-wide change, you can't have multiple approaches and no oversight. You should have multiple approaches for change. And then change is hard because your thinking controls your behavior. And we're going to talk a little bit about the science of brain development and behavior change. Finally, there's a gap between initiating and mastery. And I want you to notice the background for the PowerPoint slide is a pencil coming off a cliff, and then there's dead space, and then there's another cliff. I want you to keep in mind this gap analogy throughout our presentation, and we'll talk more about that. So the gap is real. Let's take a look at that. Remember the goals that you set at the beginning of the year, the feedback you were giving, or the plan that where you wanted to be in 2 years? Are you making a lot of progress on that? The truth is, most of us don't get too far in our goals to improve as managers or leaders. Mostly we have the best intentions. We want to learn new skills and change behaviors and accomplish good things. So what does get in the way? One answer I hear often is that change seems too complicated, too much information, too many moving parts, and too many distractions. Most of our actions and behaviors are impulses or routines driven by our subconscious brain. In other words, habits. Habits are created by repetition, and there's clear neuroscience explanation for how they're formed, maintained, and changed. They're managed by your brain's limbic system, and your limbic system is that ancient instinctual reptilian brain. It's the first part of the brain to develop, and that oversees autonomic behavior. This is where your flight and fight stimulus come from. In death situations, if you took the time to think, you might end up dead or hurt. On the other hand, intentional actions are managed by the brain's prefrontal cortex in the front of the brain. This part of your brain houses your higher level thinking and processes executive function. Changing a habit requires changing what's happening in your brain. In terms of your physical brain, mindfulness asks that you deliberately shift control of your thoughts and actions from the limbic system to the conscious awareness of your frontal lobe. The prefrontal cortex is highly integrated with other parts of your brain, and it can insert rational thinking and override habits, but it does take some work. Every time you do a behavior, you connect neurons together, and repeated behavior strengthens those neural pathways. Okay, so that's it for the science. Again, looking at the gap, some of you might know that in London, if you've been or seen pictures in the underground, there's a Minding the Gap logo. There's also an audible and written sign that you should be careful when you step off the platform or onto the train or vice versa. You can see on the slide background the illustration of what I'm talking about. The gap is the behavior or habit that is not laid down yet. So motivation goes up and down. It's never consistent. To be clear, motivation is not the key to habit formation. That's not enough to make change happen. Yes, you have to pick new behaviors you want, but motivation does not automatically, magically give you the habits you want. Motivation is not the critical factor to change behavior or to make it easy enough. So no matter how motivated you are, it doesn't guarantee change. Let's look at a model for change. And this is from the book, Change Now, 5 Steps to Turn Intentions into Reality. And I'm going to share 3 change models with you. So if you're furiously trying to take notes, remember Ken said that you could get the recording or the slides. I'm also going to not give a lot of credence to the first 2 models of change. I have a third that is my favorite. So that's where the meat of this information is going to land. In this first model, the first step is to get focused. Well, that's not real clear to me. I don't know what get focused looks like for myself, let alone anybody else, what that looks like. You have a massive list of things you could do. Focus on a change that energizes you, one that creates positive outcomes. Focus on the level of difficulty. So you have to focus around what you want to change. That's often overwhelming for a lot of people. Next, you need to choose what. This is also called goal setting. Do you need to change how you act, improve a skill, make things happen? Choose just a few important goals, then write them down and post them and say them aloud. Next, you'll need to figure out how. You need, excuse me, you need a plan. You won't change by wishful thinking or a vague to-do list. Can you put as much time into planning how you'll achieve your goals as you would planning a vacation? Your change plan should be built around 4 things. Tactics, what you're actually going to do and when you'll do it. The resources, what you'll invest things that are available to you and what you need from others. Tracking, how you'll check to make sure you're doing it. How will you measure the difference? And celebrating, how will you reward yourself when you achieve your milestones and goals? And then finally, anticipate trouble. There are going to be some things that go wrong. You'll be thrown off. So it's best to anticipate obstacles and have a plan B. So change now. Change now is not as easy as it's written. You take a step, you take another, put your plan into action and monitor your progress. I always like to tell people to keep their eye on the prize and pay attention to your impact. And again, this is a fairly complex model of change, and I can speak for myself that I would probably be overwhelmed with the change. Let's talk a little bit about being intentional about the process, and let's modify that plan a little bit. This is our second illustration of a change model. Visualize yourself doing the behavior. I always tell people, if you don't know what that change looks like, you're not going to be able to get there. You need to know where the finish line is. You need to have a very specific goal. So use your imagination, be as playful as you can if you want, and to form a clear picture in your mind's eye of you and what you look like when you're successfully forming the new habit. In other words, visualize the benefit, visualize the what and how others will benefit from it. Many people fail to initiate new behaviors because they don't take the time to picture themselves engaging in them. Visualization is a very effective and time-proven technique, and it's often used in sports psychology as well as in treatment of anxiety and depression and many other psychological issues. The second step is to realign or restructure. Your current behaviors of your life must be edited to accommodate new behavior. That might involve reaching compromises with your family or your wife, your husband or your kids, telling your friends, shifting your sleeping patterns, doing prep work in advance, or any number of things that you need to be intentional about. These will help lower your barriers between you and success. And as you begin, expect to identify additional barriers and be prepared to address them as they surface. Identify prompts. Another word I'll use for prompts is anchors, and you'll hear more about this later. It's important to find as many ways as possible to remind yourself to practice your new behavior. Willpower and motivation, again, will not be sufficient enough for you to be successful at the new habits. The best way to set anchors and prompts is to tie it to stuff you already do every day. Wake up, make coffee, brush teeth, kiss your spouse, eat, say goodbye to your kids, those type of things. Identify the activities in your day that you can anchor the new behavior to so that it will trigger you to act. Where does it make sense? You can also use your smartphone to help you remember. Here's a favorite example of mine that worked for me. An existing behavior. Someone cuts me off in traffic. I get tense. My new behavior when someone cuts me off in traffic is to pause for 2 seconds and breathe slowly and deeply and then move on. Step 4, you'll want to gather your resources. No one knows for sure what your resources you'll need for your new habit, so you need to take some time and figure that out on your own. Your resources might be people. It might be people that you've asked to help you be accountable or help you surpass the barriers. It might be how your pantry or refrigerator is stocked if you want to make some changing in your eating habits. Or it might be how your workspace is set up if you want to make some changes there. Are you starting to see how being intentional on the front end can set you up for success? Your final step is maintenance. You'll want to stay the course, set reminders, and be accountable to yourself until the new behavior becomes habit. That's kind of where a lot of us lose it. We have the honeymoon period with the new habit, and we'll stay on track for a little while, but maintaining it becomes effort.
Hey, Belinda.
Yes.
I've got two questions, if it's all right.
Sure.
So one question, and I've heard a lot about visualization, and you hear a lot about it, in sports. Do you have any suggestions for all of us who are not professional athletes on ways that we can visualize success at the first step?
Sure. And my apologies for accidentally moving the
We're
slides
good.
ahead.
We're good. They're just the participants are so fast. They you wanted to make sure
Absolutely.
Exactly. We're good.
Absolutely. Sometimes people may have insomnia or sleep issues.
Yeah.
So one thing that I encourage people to do, and I'm not a medical doctor, but I have had sleep issues in the past, is to visualize yourself when you're lying down with your eyes closed, what that feels like, what your relaxed body feels like, what your conscious thoughts leaving your mind feels like, and what that looks like to you. Another example is, and I go back to the losing weight example because it's one that a lot of people have, is instead of saying, I want to lose weight, I might say, I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to be able to fasten my pants. I want to be able to bend down without splitting a seam. So those type of visualizations are what I'm talking about. I have occasionally had friends who would cut out pictures of a person in a magazine who was at the weight that they wanted to look like. So they would post that on their refrigerator or post it on their bulletin board, just as kind of a reminder to not reach for that snack or to get up and do some activities.
That's great. I have another question from participants. Is that all right, or do you want to move on?
Sure.
So the second question, again, you've talked about it. I tend to agree with you where, we sometimes fall down as in the maintenance, and again, you talked about reminders. Any tips for those of us who might have some challenges about, following up and following through on things?
Absolutely. There are a number of phone apps that will help with habit tracking and reminders. So I would encourage you to look for those after the webinar. You can also use things like your alarms on your computer. Set an alarm to trigger a behavior, whether that's stand up or go read your email. I also have a smartwatch where I can set alarms during the day that will help me remember to do different things. So there's lots of technological things out there that can help you. You can also use an accountability partner, and I'll talk a little bit about that more and how that can be helpful.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure. So let's look at this third model for change. And if you remember, this is my favorite. This is a model from a man named B.J. Fogg, and he is a social scientist at Stanford University. He's written the popular book, Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything. You might want to check out that book on Amazon or check it out from your local library. I consider this to be the easiest model for change. And this behavior model goes something like, behavior happens when three things come together at the same moment: motivation to do the behavior, your ability to do the behavior, and a prompt. And the prompt is a thing that says, do it now. If any one of those things is missing, the behavior won't happen. This model says, find a routine you already do that you can serve as a reminder for the new habit. So let's start turning off the shower. Let's say that turning off the shower becomes a reminder to pick up the squeegee. Let's call this reminder a prompt or an anchor. You've already turned off the shower. Now you pick up the squeegee. That's the new habit you're working on, cleaning off the shower before you get out. If you start to do those things in tandem, it starts to fit naturally. Now the routine you already have, like turning off the shower, is an anchor. It's something firm in your life that already exists that you can attach the new habit to, and it's something that you're guaranteed to do. Sorry, Ken, I did it again.
Yeah, no, no worries. I'm going to ask you, so one of the participants, if it's all right, Belinda, had, they mentioned something that I imagine you're familiar with before you get into anchors. So one of the participants mentioned, when you think about, when you think about, you talked about, visualizing. And so one of the participants said, which I know I'm familiar with, can you say something about vision boards? Have you ever seen them? Is there any value to creating them? What do you say about vision boards?
Sure. And let me answer it this way. And if the person who asked the question, if I'm not on target, feel free to give me a little bit more detail. It's been my experience that using vision boards is sort of a planning mechanism. It gives me some structure. I can sort of throw some stuff on a board or on a piece of paper and then organize it in afterwards. So using a vision board gets stuff out there and you can have other people give some feedback on that. It's especially useful when you're trying to drive organizational change. So you've got several people who are stakeholders in that organization contributing those ideas and talking about the value the change has in them and some of their barriers and why it's important to develop the new change. So I use vision boards in those manners. It's a way of gathering lots of information. And again, if I didn't answer it or if you need more detail, please feel free to throw it back at me.
Yeah, I think you're good. If anything comes up, I'll let you know, but yep, you're good.
Okay, so BJ Fogg in his book Tiny Habits talks about anchors, which I also call prompts, and stacking. Schedule a time for your new behavior, and I'm going to give you some examples about that in a few minutes. I personally find that having an order or structure to my day makes me much more productive and makes me more accountable. If you set a specific time or day, then it gives you much less wiggle room to find excuses or to procrastinate. Create accountability. Tell someone what you're going to do and when. Even better, make sure you have to report it to them when you've completed it. A lot of times people will have an accountability partner. That's somebody who you have trusted with the knowledge that you're going to change a behavior or create a new habit. So the idea is if somebody else knows this, then you're accountable to them because they may remind you or they may look at you with a questioning look or just by virtue of them knowing makes you more motivated because you don't want to have to come clean to them and say, I failed. Mm-hmm. Link it to an established activity. I drink my coffee quota every morning and I work from home and that's how I start my day. I'm the early riser in this family, so I get up ahead of my husband 7 days a week and I have some quiet time so that he can sleep. So it's important that I have some meaningful work to do in that quiet time. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how I've turned my daily coffee into a routine and how I've used that as an anchor. And finally, BJ Fogg says you need to have a reward. If there isn't a benefit to a habit, then it's never going to stick. But often the reward isn't tangible in the moment of carrying out that habit. So here's an example of something that may not have a tangible reward. If you're responsible for compiling a monthly report, you will not only get negative consequences for not completing it, and the negative consequences can be anything from a disappointing comment from your supervisor or to creating a great deal of stress on yourself when you wait to the last minute. So you need to create, if that's a motivator for you, you need to create a reward for you. And sometimes that reward can be something as simple as, it's done, here's a sigh of relief, now I can take a few minutes for myself. Here's how I've used anchoring new behaviors in my personal life. In the morning after I have had my coffee, or well, usually before my coffee, I have to let my dog out. So I send her out into the backyard and I stand at the window and watch her. This is a behavior prompt or an anchor because I do this every day about the same time every day. So I'm standing at the window, not doing anything. It occurs to me that this is a complete waste of time, that I could be doing something else. So what else can I be doing? The new behavior I've chosen is stretching, just doing a couple of stretches at the window because I tend to tense up when I'm working, and it's important that I stretch my back and shoulders. And I think that might be a common thing for other people. So I have anchored this new behavior of stretching, and I do these two poses. I reach my hands over my head. Hopefully my neighbors are still asleep, and I stretch over my head to the back and to the side. So that's how I have had success in that new behavior. Well, you might be a little underwhelmed with this, but I did say start tiny and make the success threshold low. So set the bar low so that you can succeed with that. Another thing I do in the morning is to read the paper. Well, I was reading the paper at all hours of the day and sometimes missing it. And sometimes I have caught myself trying to extend my quiet morning to let my husband sleep. So my anchor is now my coffee. I go get my coffee. My dog's already been outside. She's cuddled up on the couch waiting for me to sit down, and I'll read my paper on my phone. So I have time to drink my coffee, which is important to me. I drink the same amount out of a coffee press every day, and I get the paper read. So there have been times when I finished the paper and I'm thinking, okay, what else can I do to be productive? Well, if I don't have that structure, I'm on my social media, I'm looking at other stuff, I'm not being very productive. So remember, I've said that I'm trying to be considerate of my husband and let him sleep. But in reality, I don't have all day to sit there in my bathrobe and drink coffee and read the paper. So I'm thinking, what else is something that I want to do that I haven't made time for, that I really want to do and can be easy? So I've got my coffee, I've read my paper on my phone. Now I've downloaded Duolingo. I've wanted to learn French. We go to France a lot. Our community has a sister city relationship with a city in France. So it's important for me to be able to go beyond bonjour et au revoir. So I've taken this time after reading my paper to work on my French over the phone. And there are lots of apps that you can do this. And this is, Duolingo is just one of the apps. It's very elementary, it's user-friendly. It only takes about 5 or 10 minutes for a single lesson. And it gives you little tests. It can remediate when you want to, and it's very user-friendly.
Does it have Hebrew?
You know what? I bet you it does. It has lots of.
All right.
So Ken, that's your homework. You're going to go on Duolingo and see if you can find Hebrew.
I'm going to do it. All right. Thanks.
All right.
I'll do it.
Okay. So let's talk about some natural anchors or prompts that you can stack onto. An anchor, remember, is defined as an event that kicks off an automatic urge to complete a habit. They're key to forming new habits and breaking old ones. Simply put, your anchors make the habit action happen. An anchor can be anything in our environment which our brain associates with a habit. And these contextual factors, such as where we are, who we are with, and what just happened, have a powerful and invisible effect upon our brain. Every time an anchor precedes a habit, our brain strengthens the association between a habit and its trigger. If you remember the brain model, remember the limbic system and its relation to the prefrontal cortex. Here's some more science, guys. So every time you do a behavior, it sets down a neural pathway, and that lays down in your brain. Every time you repeat that, that neural pathway is emphasized and becomes more permanent. This associative process is described in neuroscience as Hebbian learning, and it's sometimes referred to as neurons that fire together, wire together. So that's kind of something to help you remember it. An association between a habit and a trigger increases. The habit becomes more and more ingrained until we can form our habits on full autopilot. And that's a telltale sign of when you've mastered it and when you're in the maintenance phase of sustaining your habits. So why are these anchors important? First of all, they're already there, and they're the things that triggers your association and strengthens the habits. It makes your habits become automatic. Over time, it's easier and easier to stick to the new habit. Similarly, an understanding of anchors is essential for an ability to break old habits. Our old habits are constantly being reinforced by their anchors. If anybody was a smoker, you probably know what I'm talking about. A lot of smokers pick up a cigarette after a cup of coffee or after a meal. And we tend to repeat what we previously did in the similar situation. So if there's not an anchor, there's not a habit. The habit loop's interrupted. Without the repeated reinforcement, the association between the habit and the anchor weakens through neglect. Therefore, if we can eliminate our exposure to anchors for old habits, like the cigarettes, we can eliminate the habits themselves. So let's summarize a bit here. Behavior patterns are hardwired into our brain. Motivation is not enough to create and sustain a new habit. And anchors and behavior prompts are already prevalent in your waking day. Anchors are quite easy to recognize and formulate once you understand them. We can use anchors to program our behavior in the same way we would program a computer. Computers perform incredibly complex operations by combining simple algorithms, each with a basic format of if X, then Y. So to create a new habit, start by writing it out in the form of an algorithm. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you there was going to be math, but the algorithm is if anchor, then do behavior. So if X, then Y. The best anchors are all specific. The instructions are clear, leaving no room for interpretation. And they're consistent. They happen every single day with reliable frequency and preferably at the same time every day. They're automatic. The anchor happens on its own without any ongoing effort. And they're unavoidable. You cannot do anything to avoid encountering the anchor. Programmers have a way of saying and explaining an algorithm starts producing unwanted results, garbage in, garbage out. A habit algorithm can only work with the information that you feed it. Some more examples of anchors. Here's a list of anchors for morning, afternoon, and night. And these are things that probably happen to each and every one of you. They're things that you can use in your everyday life as a prompt and a trigger to help you append or stack another behavior onto.
Hey, Belinda.
Yep.
Before you go on to additional resources, can you go back to that slide? I've got a question from one of our participants.
Sure.
So I get, I'm editorializing. I get what you're talking about in terms of having the anchors, in terms of helping you sustain, your efforts to build new habits. The question from one of the participants was, you've shared a number. I mean, these are a number of which are helpful. Personal examples. Can you give an example of a behavioral prompt that might be used in business life?
Oh,
Yep.
absolutely. Thanks, Ken. That's a great question. So think about the activity that you do at work. A lot of it is rote. A lot of it is the same time every day, whether that's getting your coffee, using the restroom, or going to lunch. Those are the types of activities that you can use as an anchor to add on another behavior as a habit. Here's a good example. Sometimes I try to limit distractions by not having my email automatically ping when a new one comes in. Some of us may have the luxury of turning that off so that you can check it at certain times of day. Maybe that's after lunch or when you get up from your desk and you come back. And that way you're not inundated with email all day that distracts you. You might also use the restroom trip as an opportunity to take a stretch break. A lot of us find ourselves sitting for long periods of time, and our doctors are telling us that that's not good for us. So going to the restroom, maybe taking a lap around the building, doing a flight of stairs, or just stretching is a good habit that you can stack onto that anchor.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure. I wanted to provide you with some additional resources. The first book is by Dr. Scott Miller, and it's called Staying on Top and Keeping the Sand Out of Your Pants. It's a great short book. It's written, Scott Miller and his partner, Mark Hubble, probably were because they're older now, surfers. So they've used the surfer metaphor to talk about change. It's got lots of pictures in it. It's fast reading, and I really recommend it. The second one I recommend is Bill O'Hanlon's Do One Thing Different. And he talks about how just by doing one thing different, you can change your life. And a lot of that is what BJ Fogg has talked about is in terms of changing your behavior by appending one habit. The third resource is by BJ Fogg, and I've talked a lot about him because he's contemporary, he's very popular. His book is called The Tiny Habits, the small changes that change everything. The book is not big, it's maybe a few hundred pages. I would recommend skimming through it because there were a lot of parts, and I'm not a literary critic, but there were a lot of parts that I opted not to use. The fourth resource that I have personal use with is Habit Nest journals, and you can Google that. They also have a Facebook page, but this group of young people have come up with a habit journal for I want to lose weight, I want to exercise, I want to write a book, I want to be more productive, I want to be intentional. And it's literally a journal that takes you step by step every day with things that you want to have happen by the end of the day, the things that are most important to you, and helps you track these things and help build habits. The last book, Atomic Habits, is also a contemporary book. It's getting a lot of play on the, not the bestseller list, but it is on reserve at my library. I have scanned that. I have not had an opportunity to read that, but I have gotten some helpful information and gleaned some nuggets out of this book. So I think we have time for another question.
That's great. So, one of the things that you talked about, Belinda, was, and I know I've used this term and worked with clients. Can you say a little bit about, if you had to think about, what are some good qualities that you might look for in an accountability partner?
Okay, that's a good question, Ken. And your accountability partner can be anybody, a family member, a friend, or a colleague. but you'll want it to be somebody who's discreet and somebody that you can trust. And this is based on the idea, I referenced it before, that if I tell everybody or tell someone that I'm going to change, stop a bad habit, or implement a new one, somebody else knows about it, so I would be embarrassed if I didn't do it. You want somebody that will give you some honest feedback when you ask for it. You'll be wanting to check in with them at regular times, whether that's in person or over the internet or on the phone. I know the Fitbit app has an accountability measure where you can have a group be accountable or be accountable to a group.
Yes.
There's an ad, let's see. Be careful with this because failure is always an option. And I may not be keen on wanting everybody to know about that. I had a sister post on Facebook that she was going to run a marathon and nothing was going to keep her from doing that. And she didn't do it. I was a little mortified that everybody knew that, and I'm sure she was as well.
Gotcha. I'm wondering, it's okay if I ask a question? That's all right?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, again, you've given us, I think, some really good food for thought, Belinda. If someone was interested in developing some new habits themselves, or B, they thought, we probably could do something for our people to help our organization think about it. What are some things that you might do to be helpful to them? How can you?
Okay. Thanks, Ken. I do a lot of executive coaching with leaders and teams. They have to be accountable to each other and they have to be accountable to me. I find that people who are earnest in wanting to change will see the value in that. So we'll usually set up an individual meeting, and I've done this over phone or in person. Organizations going through change, I like to see all of the stakeholders participating in that so that it's not all top down, but kind of everyone has some input. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. I think it's great. So I would ask if any of the participants have any other questions, you can ask. I'm gonna, while we're waiting on that, I'm assuming, Belinda, it's okay if I mention another book. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things, I think you know this, that I have done is I host an executive book club. And so last year with the Bethesda Book Club, one of the books that we read, it's called The Power of Habit, The Power of Habit. And it's by a guy by the name of Charles Duhigg, Duhigg. And I thought it was, I thought it was an interesting read. It wasn't, too long. Yeah, I think we had some interesting conversations about it. So I might mention that. Anyway, we have another question from participants.
Okay.
So another question is starting a new habit at times equivalent to stopping a bad habit? And the follow-up question was, can you use a similar process to stop a bad habit? That, I think, it's an interesting question.
So stopping a habit and beginning one are two distinct behaviors. You can stop a bad habit and replace it with a new behavior. Let's see, I'm trying to think of an example. Again, with the weight loss one, I'm walking to the cabinet to get a chocolate bar. When I realize I'm doing that, and I do that on a regular basis, maybe I can replace that with go talk to my husband for a few minutes, or go walk outside, go take a breath, go pet my dog. So putting a positive behavior as an stacking onto that anchor is more helpful. But to replace it, to stop a bad habit and a new one, those are two different behavior processes.
That's great. Thank you. The last question that came up from participants, any other, other than, the ideas of anchors, you gave us 3 interesting models. Any other thoughts about how do you actually begin to build new behaviors that you haven't mentioned?
One thing is just like the Nike commercial, just do it.
Yeah.
You have to step off that ledge and you have to start. If you leave starting up to chance, it's probably not going to happen. You need to be intentional about starting. Again, you need to figure out what is the habit, what is the behavior, what's it going to look like, who can I get to help me with that, what are the resources that I need to make sure that I'm successful, and then track it. Put
Yep.
as much success building in the process as you can. Do it at the same time of day. Link it to something else, and try to find a way to reward yourself afterwards.
I think that's great. So in the spirit of starting, why don't we move on to the next slide, and we'll give participants an opportunity to answer our last polling question, some thoughts about ways they might begin. So Sarah, if you can launch this polling question, that would be great. So we'll keep the poll open another 10 seconds. And we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's go ahead and close it. So
Great.
so I'm assuming you can see this. So we did word it that people could select more than one. So 100% of people said they're going to look for current behaviors that can be anchors.
That's outstanding.
Yeah, you've done great. And then look for an accountability partner, 29%. And then another 29% asked for support of a family member. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's great. And I'll take that as a commitment that 100% of you will, after you get off of this webinar, think about that behavior and the anchor that you're going to choose.
That's great. And so, Belinda, if people are going to follow through, would you be open to having a follow-up conversation with any of them?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So if people, again, if we're going to practice what we preach, Belinda can be your accountability partner. So why don't we move on to the next slide? So what I'd like everyone to think about is, what's one thing that you learned or confirmed from the webinar? What's one thing that you're going to do differently beginning either today or tomorrow? Are there 2 behaviors, maybe one in your professional life, one in your personal life, that you can use as anchors? And is there 1 or 2 habits that you'd like to form? And so we're going to send all of you a follow-up email that will give you an opportunity to think about those actions. And we're going to give you my email momentarily. And if you wanted to schedule a follow-up session with Belinda, just send us an email. We'll make that happen. I know 1 or 2 of you got to the party late today. And so we will, Sarah, will we go ahead and send a recording to everyone, or do they need to send me an email?
The recording will go to everyone who attended.
Okay, perfect. All right. Perfect. All right. So Belinda, if you can go to the next slide. So we have my email address there. So if if you want any more information about any of the resources that Belinda mentioned, if you might be interested in delivering this type of session for some of your people, if you felt that developing new habits is something they're interested in, or if you want to schedule a quick accountability partner session with Belinda, just drop me an email and we will make that happen. Before we finish, two things. One, Sarah did post information about the next two sessions that we're hosting. So in March 30th, B. Carson is going to do a session on one of my favorite tools on action learning, coaching skills. And then in April, Mary Lippitt is going to do a session on the missing element in leadership development, situational mastery, which sounds fascinating. Sarah, can we put those links in the follow-up email to everyone so they've got them?
Yes, they'll have them there as well.
Excellent. All right. So the last thing I want to do is, Belinda, thank you for a really informative session. This was great, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to do this for us today, and I'll let you have the final word.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Sarah, for your help behind the scenes. And I just wish everybody the best. Just remember, tiny habits and set the bar low. Don't expect so much of yourself the first time, but absolutely put this into place as soon as you can and you'll be successful.
That's great. Well, Belinda, again, thanks to you, and thanks for all of you for your active participation today. And with that, that's the end of the webinar. Thank you.